Hey guys, I am so excited, so honored to be connecting with the Jack Canfield, who is the co-creator of the Chicken Soup series, also developed 42 New York Times national bestsellers, and get this, holds the Guinness Book of World Records for having 7 books on the New York Times best-selling list. He's done just a huge list of amazing accomplishments, has a crazy story. And I have a confession for you, Mr. Canfield. When I first heard of you, it was through the Success Principles that you wrote. It was one of the first personal development books that I ever read when I was in graduate school. And I didn't know that you'd written the Chicken Soup book. So I know you from the Success Principles. And it wasn't until I was watching an interview that you did with Oprah where they're like, oh, yeah, he created these Chicken Soups books. So you'll always be the Success Principles guy in my mind, which makes me really excited for this workbook that you have coming out, which now more than ever we need the Success Principles. So Mr. Canfield, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, now I was going to ask you a little bit just about your backstory, because I know when someone hears Success Principles and they listen to your bio and see what you've created in your life, they might say, well, it's easy for Jack to say because he is successful. He can talk about success principles without realizing your backstory and where you came from. So if you don't mind just sharing with us a little bit about your story.
Well, I grew up in Wheeling, West Virginia, primarily, and across the river, Martins Ferry, Ohio. My dad made $8,000 a year, so we were not wealthy. He was an alcoholic and a workaholic. My mother was an alcoholic. I grew up poor. And fortunately, I played football in high school and did very well at it, so I got a scholarship to go to college. But as I like to say, I graduated from the half of the class that made the top half possible. So it wasn't that I was the smartest guy in the school. But when I was in graduate school to become a high school teacher, I ran across a man named W. Clement Stone, who was a friend of Napoleon Hill, who had written Think and Grow Rich. And at the time, I was living on a $129 paycheck every 2 weeks. My apartment rent was $79. So that first 2 weeks, I had about $50 to live on. I was eating these 21-cent dinners, which were contadina tomato paste with water, garlic, salt, and pepper, over 11 cents worth of noodles. And today it would be the ramen noodle diet, but we didn't have ramen noodles back then. And so I know what it's like to be poor. Fortunately, I met a guy in this laundromat who turned me on to W. Clement Stone. I managed to go to one of his workshops, and he ended up hiring me to work in his foundation to go and teach success principles to kids in high school and teach the teachers how to teach that. That was really the beginning of all that for me. And he challenged me at the time. And when I was working for him, again, I was making $8,000 a year. And then he started paying me a little more. I think I was up to about $20,000 a year when I left. But he challenged me to set a goal that was so big that I know it was only the principles he was teaching me. And then within a few years, I had set a goal to make $100,000, and I didn't make $100,000. I think I made $92,320, but that was about 5 times more than I was making at the time. And that's when I realized this stuff really, really works. And then I wanted to turn around and teach it to other people. So I spent my entire life studying more principles. I've interviewed probably over 100 of the most successful people in North America, generals in the Army, professional athletes, top salespeople, CEOs of companies, entrepreneurs, top podcasters, you name it. And I found that these same principles are universal, the ones that you read in the Success Principles. And now what's happened is we really realize that so many of the people that read that book, it changed their life. But a lot of people read it and they just put it on the shelf, like you see behind me. And they end up with shelf-esteem instead of self-esteem because they didn't really do the exercises. And so we noticed all the people going through our coaching programs and all the people going through our live trainings were doubling their income, tripling their time off, losing 25 pounds, making great relationships, getting out of crappy jobs into their own, or maybe starting their own business, their own coaching program, whatever it might be. And so we said, let's put everything we teach in our coaching programs into between the covers of a book. Let's see if it'll work with a group of people that don't have a coach. And we found 30 people and just said, who hadn't gone through any of my work, didn't know who I was, and said, just do the exercises in this book. When you're done, call us. And in several months, people were having incredible results. So they were happier, they were healthier, they were making more money. They were losing weight. They were exercising, meditating, doing all the things you need to do in order to be successful. So then we said, okay, we've got this, and we released the book. And what's amazing, the first 2 days on Amazon, the book sold out. And so now we're back to a second printing of another. I think we printed 20,000. Now we printed another 10. Barnes and Noble still has copies, but other than that, you have to wait if you're going to Amazon.
Incredible. That's incredible. This show is, we call Unconventional Leaders. We want to highlight stories of people who have built something literally from the ground up.
Sure.
And sometimes when you grow up with opposition or in poverty, there's certain amount of, I guess, stigma towards success. Did you have any of that, like any hesitation around concepts? I know you talked about having a positive money consciousness and the way you view money. Did you struggle with that at all as a teacher and meeting this man?
I did. When I first started out, my dad was kind of an anti-corporate guy. He thought corporations just rip people off and screw the laborers and all that. I grew up in that kind of mindset. And so I had that. And then in the 70s, it was kind of the counterculture. And I was one of those people with a beard and long hair and believed that, the corporations and the government were messing everyone over. And it took me, W. Clement Stone, he used to keep saying, success is not a 4-letter word. Wealth is not a 4-letter word. It's what you do with it. He taught me that if you don't have money, the good you can do is limited to where you are. If you have money, you can do good in Africa, you can do good in India, you can support cataract surgeries of people that are in third world countries, you can support, missions, you can support all kinds of things.
Right.
And so I began to realize that money was valuable. One of the exercises Stone had us do was go down to the stock exchange, and as all these rich people were coming out at the end of the day, getting into their limousines, we had to stand there and say, thank you for being a model of what's possible.
No way. Really?
Very weird and embarrassing. But he was just trying to get us to see, the Dalai Lama said to my friend Mark Victor Hansen, who was the co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, Mark said, what's the best thing we can do for poor people? And the Dalai Lama said, don't be one of them. And I thought that was from the Dalai Lama, a Tibetan master, and he was basically saying, show people that it's possible, even though Mark came from a poor family as well, that it's possible to succeed, not to become an idiot, not to become someone who doesn't care, dispassionate. We see a lot of that in Washington, and we see a lot of that on Wall Street. But the reality is there are really, really, really good people that are able to have wealth and do good with their wealth and enjoy their wealth. When I was in India in February, I worked with this guy. He was an Ayurvedic doctor. He was also a spiritual master, but mainly he was an MD. And he said, success is knowing what you want, knowing how to get it, and knowing how to enjoy it once you get it. And most of us fall down in one of those 3 areas. We either don't know what we want, we ended up working for people who do, or we don't know how to get it, which is why I wrote the Success Principles, now the Success Principles workbook. Or once we get it, we don't know how to enjoy it. We see millionaires and billionaires that are drug addicted, that are unhappy, their marriages fail, they just, the kids don't talk to them, etc. So it's all 3 of those things we want to master.
Sure. I'm grateful you brought up your time in India, because one of the things I love about your work is, you're always teaching about the spiritual element to success and becoming better. And I was going to ask you, because this is one thing that I've always struggled with as a type A driven kind of person, and you talk about it in your book, committing to never-ending improvement and always working on yourself. So how do you kind of balance that achievement side and always improving yourself, and also to balancing that with surrender and letting go and trusting that there's something higher at work?
Well, Reverend Michael Beckwith, who was in the movie The Secret with me, had a model of the 4 stages of spiritual growth, and I think explained that really quickly. Number 1, he said most people live in what they call the victim stage. They think the world's happening to them, like the coronavirus is happening to them, the recession is happening to them, and it's God's doing something to them. Why, God, are you making me suffer? And then the second stage is what's called the manipulator stage, where you realize there are universal principles, strategies, and skills that if you apply them, they always work. There are certain things, if you do them the right way, it's like knowing the combination to a lock. If you have the numbers in the right order, the lock always opens. So there is a lock to this thing called success. And if you know the right numbers in the right order, the right techniques, what to do when, in what order, and so forth, then you can open that up. And so that's the next stage. And so we learn these universal principles like the law of attraction, the value of meditation and affirmations and visualization, taking action, responding to feedback, persevering, all that. Now, the third stage is where you realize if there's these universal laws, there must be a lawmaker. Like, how did all this come together? What is the intelligence behind all of this? And that's when you begin to surrender. Christians would say, not my will, but thy will. Other people would say just surrendering to your internal guidance or following your joy, following your bliss, listening to your intuition. And when we do that, then we're being guided from our higher level of consciousness, whether we're tuning into our own consciousness or something outside of us. We can debate that forever. But the point being that there is this thing that's smarter than our normal ego. And then we become guided. And now we are guided to what we need to do, but then we use the principles that we learned in the manipulative stage to actually do that which we're being guided to do, which might be to feed the homeless or to start a charity or to write books, to empower people, whatever it might be, podcasts like you're doing, etc. And then the last stage is what's called you identify, you say, well, if there's this thing called God, the universe, universal intelligence, source energy, I am also that, because I am part of what all that is. So just like one drop of water is not the whole ocean, it's still ocean. And so you get to the place where you see these people that are very highly spiritually evolved, and they just imagine they want something and it appears. There are literally people that can, in India, who can appear things out of their hands. They drop rings into your hand that fit you. They're wearing a t-shirt. They just go like this and a ring drops in and it fits you perfectly. Or they'll give you beads, like mala beads, like rosary bead type things. So, and I've experienced that. It's pretty awesome. I don't have that ability. I probably have the ability. I've not taken 40 years to develop it because I thought things were more important. But the point being that the way you balance, inner guidance and surrender, is surrendering to a higher power, but then using the skills that you've learned in the manipulative stage. And you have to go through those stages usually in order. So it's not to make any stage wrong any more than fifth graders should be saying second graders are terrible people because they're not fifth graders.
Sure. That makes sense. At what point in your career were you introduced into spirituality, or were you always spiritually intuitive, understood this?
Well, I went to church as a kid, and I sang in the choir. I actually sang the part of Jesus in an Easter pageant once. So I was pretty much into all of that. Then I went off to Harvard as an undergraduate where I played football. And I read a whole bunch of philosophy, and I kind of became an atheist. I didn't believe there was a God. I thought it was, what did they say? Religion is the opiate of the masses. I think that was Marx said that, Karl Marx. So I was kind of in that space. And then when I was in graduate school at the University of Massachusetts studying to be a teacher, I took a Kundalini yoga class. Someone just said, this guy's really cool. You ought to go study his Kundalini yoga stuff. And we were meditating after one of the yoga classes, and it just all came flooding in. Like a doorway opened, and I was connected to this higher spiritual energy. And I haven't stopped since. So that was probably, I was maybe 26 years old, something like that.
Wow.
And started meditating. I've done 10-day meditation retreats. I've meditated sometimes 2 hours a day for months at a time. And then there are times when I meditate 20 minutes a day. That's pretty much my minimum. I teach something called the Hour of Power. I think every entrepreneur should do this. Whatever business you're in, is 20 minutes of meditation, 20 minutes of aerobic exercise or high intensity interval training, something really to get your blood moving. And then 20 minutes of meditation exercise. So meditation, reading, and exercise. So you want to read something that is going to uplift you, whether it be like a Chicken Soup for the Soul book or the Bible, if you're spiritual and religious. It could be a motivational book, like all these self-help books that are out there, or a book of poetry, but something that's going to inspire you or give you more skills in your field. If you do that, at the end of the year, you're going to be wiser, healthier, and wealthier.
Sure. While you're talking, I was just wondering, we have so much knowledge at our fingertips, and, like the success principles, the workbook, it's all right here. I mean, you can outline for us, hey, I've talked to all of these people. This is what you need to do to be successful. You said earlier that books are falling off the shelf. People are hungry for this knowledge. What keeps us back from taking action on it and experiencing that success in our own lives?
Well, what I've come to see after years and years and years, and I've been running these professional development and personal development seminars since I was in my 30s, and I'm 75 as we sit here talking.
Mhm.
So over 40 years. And what I've discovered, there are two things that stop people from moving forward. Number one is fear. We can talk about how to remove that. But the more potent one is what's called unconscious limiting beliefs. Every time we have an experience as a child that doesn't quite work out the way we want, we usually tell ourselves something about it. I'm not smart enough. I can't do this. It's not safe to ask for what I want.
Mhm.
So it's not okay to be enthusiastic or sexual or, whatever it might be. And so I was just talking to a guy the other day who works in the same field, and he was telling me about how when he was a kid, he was in a race in high school, and normally he was a quarter miler, but now they put him in this mile race because the other guy was sick. So he said he was running at about, 3/4 of a mile. He was ahead of everybody. And all of a sudden his legs just gave out. I used to be a track star in high school, so I know what that's like. And it doesn't matter what you do, your legs just turn into mush. And he said that happened, and he didn't know that happened. And he just thought that somehow he was bad, and he failed. And so he literally came up with this story about himself that he never quite finishes things. And here he was in his 40s working on a book, and he'd done all but the last two chapters, and he just couldn't get himself to work.
Mm.
And when he did a process that he now teaches and that I teach also, he discovered that that was what was going on. There was this limiting belief that I don't finish things. Had a woman who was a Olympic level athlete. Unfortunately, she was supposed to go to Japan next year, but they've canceled the Olympics for 2020. One they're gonna or 2020 they're gonna do 2021. But the point is, when she was in practice, she'd have these incredible times, and then when she would compete, she wouldn't, and she couldn't figure it out. And what happens is when we did this process with her, we call it identifying and releasing limiting beliefs. She discovered that when she was 10, she asked her mom, Mom, how come when I bring home my medals, my ribbons, and my trophies, you don't display them like all the other moms do? I go to my friends' houses. And she said, well, whenever you bring those home, it makes your brother feel bad because he doesn't have any. And
Wow.
so she decided that when I win, it makes people I love feel bad. So subconsciously, here she is, like, 12 years later, she doesn't realize it, but when she's racing, this limiting belief is in there, stopping her from winning.
Mm.
Another guy, natural salesman, unbelievably cool. And when he got out of college, he came home after his first couple of months of working. He went to work for the same company as his dad, selling insurance. And his check after 2 months was bigger than his dad's check, who'd been working there for like 15 years. And when he showed his dad, thinking he'd be proud of him, his dad went, oh, and walked away. And later he heard his mom say to him, the reason your dad walked away like that is he was so ashamed of himself that he couldn't make as much money as you were. And he decided, I don't ever want to make my dad feel bad because I love him. So here he was in a workshop with me 20 years later in his 40s, and we uncovered that. And then he began to realize, I'm not responsible for my dad's feelings, blah, 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 blah. And he went on to make over $1 million that year. So we have these limiting beliefs that we have to bring to the surface, release them, reprogram ourselves with a positive belief, and then move forward. And I've seen people just self-sabotaging themselves so much from having these limiting beliefs that get in the way of their being successful. But there are tools that you can do to get rid of them.
Yeah. What limiting belief did you have when you were an educator and met Mr. Stone?
Oh my God. Well, I thought money was bad. That people that had money were evil and corrupt and didn't care about people. They weren't compassionate, the usual mentality that a lot of us still have. Um, I didn't think I could be that successful because I hadn't seen my dad be successful. So I didn't have any model in my own family for doing that. And when I went to Harvard, most of the kids I met there, their parents were wealthy. So I thought you had to be the son or a daughter of a wealthy person. Like, I had friends with names like Larry Rockefeller, Max Factor III, John Danforth, et cetera. And so what logged in for me was you had to come from money to make money. You had to have that connections. You had to know people. You had to, have the background and the capital to work with. Not true, but that was a belief I had about it.
Mm.
And I also think I really did believe that having money would corrupt you. The old Bible quote. It's not money that corrupts us. It's the lust after money.
Yeah. I was going to ask about if those fears if do they go away, or are they replaced with new fears? Like I was wondering, because you've been doing this for over 40 years now, and I was kind of wondering about your own fears and limitations now, if it's something that you can just recognize, or if they shift and they change.
Sure.
I'm still dealing with my first few set of fears right now, so.
Well, there's three ways to get rid of fear. Number one is to do the thing you're afraid of and survive. That's how you build self-confidence. If you're afraid to do a podcast and you do it, and you do a couple hundred of them and nothing bad happened and good things happen, you begin to go, hey, I can do this. Now, sometimes there are still fears that come from childhood, that maybe when you gave a report in school, kids laughed at you, or your teacher said, that's the dumbest report I ever heard, or you got an F in speech or whatever. And that can still keep showing up a little bit under the surface, even though you're pushing through it. That's why doing the limiting belief and replacing it with a positive belief is valuable. The other thing that creates fear is going into the future. So a lot of people say, fear is fantasized experiences appearing real, but it's future experiences appearing real.
Yeah.
Like if you're in your studio, it's in Georgia, right?
Yes.
And you've got a snake coming across the floor of your studio toward you, most people would get afraid. But in order to be afraid, you have to go into the future and imagine the snake's going to bite you. In other words, a snake slithering across the floor is just a snake slithering across the floor. We've all seen garden snakes and so forth, no big deal. But if you saw a rattlesnake and it was rattling, people freak out. Why? Because they've seen so many pictures and heard so many stories about people being bitten, and then you got to cut the little X's and suck the blood out, and they might not make it to the hospital and all that. I've literally go hiking in a place called Rattlesnake Canyon, where I live in Santa Barbara, California. And I've seen rattlesnakes, even when they're in their mating thing, with both of them going, kind of thing, pretty wild. But you just stop and you back off. They don't want to fight you any more than you want to fight them. As long as you don't threaten them, you just back away slowly. Everything's cool. So if you have facts like that, then you don't get afraid. If you don't go into the future and imagine something bad, if you just stay in the present moment. And then the last thing is mindfulness and meditation. If I'm right now talking to you, nothing bad's happening. It's only if I go off and think, gee, am I talking too much? Did I say the wrong thing? Did I forget to say that thing? Then I start to go into fear. So by being in the present, or doing the thing you're afraid of and surviving it, like that's why fire walks and jumping out of airplanes and bungee cord jumping is so valuable for people to realize, wow, I didn't burn my feet. I didn't go splat at the end of the parachute jump. What else have I been telling myself I can't do? So I've done the fire walk with Tony Robbins. I thought it was very valuable to realize that I was stopping myself in a lot of ways. It's so profoundly impactful that you really get the message.
Yeah. Now, I know one of the things that our listeners, we deal with, we're in our early 30s, we're setting off on our unconventional journeys, first few years of business, trying to level up. And one of the things you talk about in your book is surrounding yourself with successful people. And sometimes in our mind, we have all these stories going on of, I don't belong here, inadequacy, which is a fear. How do we move past that and start surrounding ourselves with the kind of people we want to become?
Well, you have to just basically take the risk and say, I do belong here. And you belong anywhere you want to go. And leave it up to other people to say no. The problem is we say no to ourselves before we give other people an opportunity. I remember being in a workshop and there were all these beautiful women and handsome men. And this one guy blew me away. He asked all the women, there was about 30 of us in what was called an encounter group. And at one point he said, I'd like to know how many women are attracted to me. Raise your hand if you're attracted to me. I thought, are you kidding me? You would ask, you are the bravest guy on the planet. And a whole bunch of women said they were. And I was so moved by what he did. I asked the same question and was shocked to find a whole lot of people were attracted to me too. And because I was very shy as a kid, I went to an all-male school. So basically, I wasn't casual around women. I had all brothers and one sister she was really young when I was in high school. I think she was in third grade or something. So didn't have like you hanging out with your sister's girlfriends thing, where I just got comfortable around girls my own age. And so I think what happens is that we have to take the risk. I teach an exercise in the Success Principles workbook about being willing to risk rejection. If I ask you for a date, you say no. I didn't have a date before I asked you. I don't have a date after I asked you. Life didn't get worse. I spent my whole life not dating you, so I know I can survive that. That's the kind of the thing that we tell ourselves. Right. So when you realize that no is that asking is just a numbers game, So most people are afraid of rejection. And basically what I do in my trainings, I have an exercise I do called the 9 no's exercise. And everybody stands up and thinks of 3 things they could ask for that would help them achieve their major goal that they have in life, their major professional goal. And then you mill around, and I would come up to you and I would say, will you give me $10,000 to take a month off and write my book? Let's say something like that. And you would say no. Then you'd say, will you do a testimonial for my new training program? And I say no. And then now we've both given 1 no. Now we go over and we find someone else and we ask for something. We give a no to them, they give a no to us. However, on the 9th person that asks you something, you say yes. So what happens, we do this for about 15 minutes. Everybody gets yeses. It may only get 1 or 2. Some people get 7 or 8 just because of the randomness of it. And then we stop and we say, what did you learn? Everyone says, oh, it's just a numbers game. If I ask a lot of people, someone's going to say yes. And when they said no, it wasn't personal. They didn't have a yes to give. They didn't have money. They didn't have time. In this case, they didn't have a yes to give. And then one person said, I just stood in front of that person over and over and said, can I have $100? Can I have $100? Can I have $100? I asked them 9 times. And on the 10th time, they had to say yes. And it's like kids do that. Mom, can I have a cookie? No. Mom, can I have a cookie? No. Mom, can I have a cookie?
That's the truth.
You can't have a cookie. And eventually they wear you down. You say, okay, here's a cookie, And so we can go back to the same person. Just because they said no once doesn't mean they'll say no in the future. Their situation may have changed.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of multi-level marketing people that come to my seminars, and they'll say, well, I asked my brother and he said, don't ever talk to me about multi-level marketing again. And then like 3 months later, they're in the coronavirus lockdown. They can't work, but they could sell this, essential oils or weight loss product or whatever from their home. And now they're going like, hey, talk to me about that internet marketing thing again, whatever. So the reality is people's realities change. And I always teach people, I have a term in the book, I say, you want to become an asshole. Ask as many people as you can. There's this thing called the law of probabilities. The more people you ask, the more likely you're going to get a yes. Chicken Soup for the Soul was rejected by 144 publishers. It was 145th publisher who said yes. If I had stopped at 100, I wouldn't be here today. No one would know who I am. So you never want to give up. I only learned this a couple years ago. Howard Schultz, who started Starbucks, was rejected 217 times by banks for funding before he got a bank to say yes and invest in his company to start Starbucks. So again, it's perseverance. Everyone you ever talk to, me included, we all have our stories of rejection, 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 failure, 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 failure. And it's the willingness to fail faster and be rejected and learn from that. The thing we did when we were being rejected by these publishers, someone taught me this about halfway through that process. They said, ask them, what would it take for you to say yes? What would have to happen for you to say yes? And one of the publishers said, if we knew we could sell 20,000 copies, we'd say yes. That's the minimum number that makes it worth going through all the rigmarole of editing it and promoting it. So Mark Victor Hansen and I, my co-author, everywhere we went for the next several months, every talk we did for 300 people, 500 people, 50 people, 1,000 people, we put a piece of paper on everybody's seat that was printed and it said, I, name, promise to buy X number of copies of Chicken Soup for the Soul when it's published. They put their name and their address. And then we collected 20,000 of those, several bankers' boxes. We gave them to our publisher and said, here, and the publisher, we gave them, said, yes, I'll do it. Well, we went on that year to sell 130,000 and the next year, 1.3 million of those books. And how we started was taking all those sheets of paper, stapling an order form to them, sending them out in an envelope. And I would say 85% of them ordered them, including one guy in Canada who bought 1,000 copies, gave them to all of his coaching clients.
It takes some grit.
Grit is a good word. Yes.
Yeah. You think it's like a predestined thing? You guys were supposed to, quote, make it? Or do we all have that ability in us? We just choose to or don't choose to tap into it?
I think we're all supposed to make it. I think that it's in our DNA and it's in the universe. You either get to decide the universe is for you or the universe is against you. And, like Einstein said, either nothing's a miracle or everything's a miracle. And my point of view is that the universe is on your side. Yep. And, but you have to believe that. You have to act as if that's true. If you don't take action, the law of attraction, a lot of people think, well, I just visualize and affirm it and sit there and wait. The last 6 letters in the word attraction are ACTION. There's a clue there. Law of attraction, action. The word satisfaction, in Latin comes from satis, means enough, facere, F-A-C-E-E-R-E, stands for making. So same root word as manufacture, when you make something with your hand, like a manuscript you write. So to have enough satisfaction requires enough action. And so it's right in the languaging.
That's it. That is it. I have one last question for you, but before we do that, I want to give an opportunity to share about this workbook that you came out with, and also just thank you so much for your work. Like I mentioned earlier, your books was one of the first personal development books I read, and it hooked me in because, as you can see, this is what I'm doing now with my life, and I absolutely love it. So thank you for your work, and would love to hear about the Success Principles workbook.
Well, I'll put a cover of the copy up, right, so people can see what it looks like. So when you go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or you can go to thesuccessprinciplesworkbook.com/order. And if you do that, you're going to get a bonus of an 1.5-hour seminar I teach on this. And also that you can download the first chapter for free. So you can start on it right now before you even get it in the mail. But what happens is the workbook is 17 chapters, 17 success principles from the bigger book. These are that combination lock we talked about. And if you do it in order, if you do the exercises, each chapter has 3 or 4 exercises. Like there's an exercise on fear where you say, I'd really like to blank, and I scare myself by imagining this would happen if I would. So you begin to see it's you scaring yourself. There's nothing really intrinsically scary out in the world. And then there's like, well, what step could you take to break through that? So there are all these worksheets. And also I would recommend you have an accountability partner, someone you work through the book with, so you call each other every day and make sure you're doing the exercises. That could be your spouse, it could be a business partner, it could be one of your older, adult children, whatever, or teenagers. One of the most wonderful things that ever happened for me was I got an email from a teenager who was 15 years old. He said, my mother bought your book, the original Success Principles book. She never reads books. I was really curious. So I stayed up all night. I read the first half of the book. The next day I read the next half of the book. I was getting F's in school. I was smoking dope. I was skipping classes. Now I'm going to all my classes. I'm getting A's and B's. Thank you so much. You've transformed my life. Now, this is a kid who we would have probably called a delinquent, who was smoking and drinking and doing dope and all this stuff. And so the book changed his life. But what's so great about the workbook is it literally takes you through exercise by exercise by exercise. All you have to do is do it. I almost called this book, Don't Read This Book, because I don't want you to read it. I want you to do it. Yeah. The book you do. And literally for what it costs to get like 4 cups of coffee at Starbucks, you can buy this book online. Right now, you can't go out to Starbucks anyway, because you're probably sequestered when you're reading this, sheltering at home. And if you're not, so what? What's more important? And I just really encourage you to do it. Not because I need another dollar. I have sold 500 million books. So I live in a 6,000 square foot house on 3 acres of land. And my grandchildren's lives are set if I wanted to do that, but I'm not, because I don't want to turn them into, dependent people.
Right. I think it's interesting how your life kind of went full circle with, you working in this school and educating, and here you are getting these emails and letters from these 15-year-old kids. It's so amazing. I was going to ask you for a final question. Let's say we were to go back to that young man, Jack, when he was teaching. It's before he met Mr. Stone, before his whole life changed. And he probably had no idea what was about to happen to you, and the success that you would have, the failures, the ups, the downs, the people you would meet. If you were to go back and sit with that young man and tell him one thing that you understand now that he did not know back then, what would that be?
I would say to him, you have everything you need to do anything you want. You're not able to have a dream without given the capacity to make it come true. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to learn things you don't know yet. You're going to have to partner up with people and learn how to cooperate and collaborate. And you're going to have to get some degrees and certifications you don't have. But I don't want you to think that you're not smart enough, capable enough, able enough, connected enough to do what you want. You have the capacity. Believe in yourself, trust yourself, follow your heart, and it's all going to work out.
That's it. That's it. It was an honor. Thank you so much for your time and joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Heather.